Ultimately, I just kept thinking, I wish this game had more balance. And I don't mean because there's a bad aspect to it, it's just there's so many good aspects. In fact, one that really caught me off guard, and it seems like it's just used not nearly enough. What's up, everyone? It's Nima, and I want to talk about a game called Process of Elimination. And before we get into that, though, I do want to remind you to please hit that like and subscribe button. We are that much closer to 1,000, which is great. It's insane how close we really are. Anyway, on to the game. So, Process of Elimination is a very interesting game. It has this mixture of Danganronpa with real-time strategy battle mechanics, which I find is very interesting and plays off very, very well. You play as the unremarkable, unconfident Watto, a detective who became a detective because of past tragedies that had happened. One of his friends was killed in front of his eyes and he couldn't stop it from happening. So he decides to take up the mantle of detective so that he may be able to punish those responsible for such hideous crimes or prevent them altogether. Now, unfortunately for Watto, his current job has him pretty much just chasing cats. Literally chasing lost cats. Fortunately for him, his world is about to change. Now, something that he's always dreamed of was being a part of the Detective Alliance. This is a collective of world-famous, notable, expert detectives who he's always wanted to be a part of, as he felt like this would really solidify him as a detective. Now, this dream will suddenly turn into a nightmare, as he learns that the Detective Alliance themselves are being hunted by an apex predator of sorts, a serial killer known as the Quartering Duke. Well, it seems that the Detective Alliance needs your help because they can't figure out who this person is either, and they're left with no other option but to allow you into their ranks. But really, before you're able to meet anyone or go through any sort of initiation, you're drugged and you wake up on an island alone. But you do have some new Detective Alliance hardware in the form of a tablet they call a D-pad. Now, this tells you to head north and head to this gigantic mansion, essentially. And you do so, but quickly, as soon as you enter the door, you're knocked unconscious. Although this time when you awaken, you're met face to face with some strange individuals, all who seem to be diverse in form, and happen to suspect you of potentially being dangerous. You learn that this is actually the Detective Alliance, and you let them know that you've been admitted into their group by their senior detective. They let you know that they all go by code names and nobody actually shares each other's names, and so you start to learn an aspect of this group that you didn't know before, and that is everyone just has kind of a random name, something that usually projects some form of who they are. For instance, there is one who is in a suit of armor, and his name is Armor. Now, you quickly become incompetent. That is your name, and it suits you well enough because you don't have any of the skills that the others do. Now, this leads further and further, but I'm not going to ruin any more story points. I will say, though, that quickly they think you are actually the Quartering Duke and you might be the serial killer. So one thing that this game really excels at is writing. The writing is top notch and it keeps you engaged, which is a lot to say because most of this game is reading. There is a very narrative heavy aspect about the game, meaning there was times when I sat in for 2 to 3 hour gaming session and all I did was read. And that actually says a lot about how well the writing is done. For me to be engaged in something for 2 to 3 hours, well, that's just insane, especially because I have the attention span of a goldfish. And being able to just stay engaged and interested in the same story says a lot for how well written it is and how much depth each character has. The interpersonal relationships, and you can actually see these characters evolve over time. Many of them go from idealist loner to more of a team player, and to understand that the only way that they're going to be able to solve this case is if they all work together. Because there's another layer that's dropped upon you very early on in the game, and that is that the serial killer, the Quartering Duke, the murderer themselves are actually amongst the group. One of these detectives is the serial killer. And as luck would have it, you are now all trapped in this mansion together. an ideal situation for this serial killer to start picking you guys off one by one by one. Again, I don't want to go too much further into it, but I will say that this is the cornerstone of the story of Process of Elimination. And again, I really do appreciate everything they brought forth in the game. I appreciate the narrative and the storytelling. But the one thing that really caught me off guard was the mechanics, the battle system. Now, ultimately, I shouldn't say battle system because you're not actually battling anyone. You use this real-time strategy as a way to get the detectives to work together. As you're on your D-pad and you're able to give them instructions to investigate certain areas, to assist each other, to analyze evidence. All of this is done in that battle mechanic, which I find incredibly fun. I've never seen this grid-based system used to tell this sort of story or to implement these sort of mechanics. But my biggest issue is they don't do it enough, because this becomes a highlight of the game that is just far and few between. And if there is any major critique that I could give it, it's that they need to add these events into the game more often. They really break up the monotony of these long-form dialogue banter between you and your now new teammates, or you and another person. It needs that to just kind of shake things up a little bit. But not only that, because this whole idea is incredibly creative, and the way that they implement it is also really insane. There is a lot there, and even when you're using it, there's a lot of options and different mechanics, but you don't really get a chance to experiment very much because, again, this just doesn't happen that often. I have played this game for hours and hours and hours on end, and as I've said before, there's many times where I would be playing for 3, maybe even 4 hours, and it only would come up one time in that time span. But as I said before, the storytelling is done really well, and the characters do have a lot of depth. It makes you just want to know more about the game, so that also keeps you coming back for more, but it just would be nice to have more of these events occur during the game. I can't really comment on graphics because this doesn't really allow for that. See, most of it is told in that narrative style where you have a 2D asset of your character who's highly defined but with very little animation and just a lot of dialogue. Now, when you get into the quote-unquote battle mechanics, or the RTS mechanics, if you will, there is a downgrade of detail as your characters or the other characters become more like pawns and less like actual humans, but it doesn't really take away from the game at all, and in fact, it kind of helps facilitate some of the movement and literal accessibility when it comes to the RTS style, meaning there's times when you have to have a lot of your detectives in the same area, and if they were full adult looking detectives, they might be really hard to see past. So I can see why they did what they did with the unique character representation. Now, as we look at the sound of the game is done with Japanese voiceovers to an extent, but again, the dialogue is read out in English if you prefer, and the music itself is fine. It accompanies the game quite well. It's not epic or anything like that. It's not going to be one of those things that you want a soundtrack to, but it does the job of fitting the game, and that's really all we ask out of it. Now, ultimately, I really enjoyed this game. I enjoyed it far more than I would. This isn't a game that I would probably have picked up on my own, especially because it's about 3 hours in before you actually get into the game, and maybe even a few hours until you're actually able to use the RTS battle mechanics. So you can see that this is a long haul. This game takes quite a while to really get going, and even once it's going, it's still pretty slow moving. That doesn't mean that it's bad though, it just means that if you're a person who enjoys narrative heavy games, you're gonna enjoy it. If you like the Danganronpa and that kind of interactive murder mystery style, I think this is gonna be a fantastic game for you. Now, I personally enjoy those games, but they're not usually my go-tos, but I will say if I have to put a number grade on this game, I would give it a solid 7 out of 10. It, I think, earns that, if not a little bit more. It is so close to being like an 8 or a 9 if they just had more of those battle instances where you were able to break up that kind of tedious banter. Again, I hate to call it tedious because it is very important and it's very interesting, but after a while, you do feel like you've had enough. But that's my thoughts on Process of Elimination. I actually enjoyed it, and I would suggest that if you're into that style of game, you should definitely check it out. And even if not, this one one might be something that would be worth it to dip your toe in, just because it is so much different than a lot of those other games where you're playing detective, but really more it's kind of a point and click thing and that's about it. This one offers more than that and actually puts you in the role of being a leader, which you also get to experiment with and to fully realize that role as well. But that's my thoughts. I'm curious what your thoughts are on it. Have you heard of this game? Is this a game you're interested in? Let me know what games you're going to pick up this week. Any and all comment down below in the comment section will be much appreciated. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.